She would get picked up by the back of her neck from my dad and slammed on the ground. And if she cried because she was missing home, and my dad would yell restraint. When he yelled restraint, we all had to come and put all of our weight on their pressure points. 2 girls to each leg, 2 girls to each arm, so 5 people total. We would be told if we didn't do it hard enough that we would be next. So we would be sitting there for hours pushing as hard as we can. And my mom and dad, they would kiss and smile at each other. And it was almost like they enjoyed it.
Yeah.
That happened almost every day. A restraint happened almost every day.
Hey, my name is Shelise Ansola, and this is Culottes to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions or organizations and finding healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. If you're only listening and you want to see our faces, you can go to our YouTube channel at Culottes to Consciousness, where you can join in on the conversation, leave those words of encouragement for our guests who are coming on and bravely sharing their stories. It means a lot to them because I'm sure they do read those comments, and it helps boost the algorithm so more people can see these stories and become aware of what's going on out there. So today's guest, she was part of the documentary on HBO called Let Us Pray, and we're going to be diving into the IFB, which is the Independent Fundamental Baptist Church, specifically with a focus on these boarding schools for kids and how she was involved, how her parents were involved, and the different abuses that did go on there. This is a little bit of a trigger warning. We are going to be talking about sensitive subjects, different types of abuse, so please listen and watch with care. So thank you so much for joining us, Amanda.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. And your story, it was like the 3rd episode that really focused in on you, and just the whole time, it's so heartbreaking hearing everything that you went through. So I just want to thank you for not only doing the documentary, but coming on and reliving some of this with us as well to help other people, to spread awareness. It really means a lot that you're willing to do this.
I'm sure it probably, like, to you as well, it's healing. So as much as people, I don't know how to explain it, as much as people say it takes a lot, it's honestly, it does, but it's healing. It really is healing.
Good. Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that. So I guess we can just jump right in then. Let's start talking a little bit about the IFB specifically. Maybe just give us a little bit of an idea of the belief system, some of the rules, and things that are a little bit more problematic.
The belief system is the Bible is 100% truth. Nothing is fallible in the Bible. And so they follow it literally to a T. As a woman, you can't wear pants. They call themselves independent because each person within the church has different convictions. And so one family might wear pants, but that was not, like, the majority of the people I grew up with were not allowed to wear pants. You had to wear skirts down to the ankle. For me, eventually I was allowed to wear short sleeve, but when I was like a little kid, I could only wear quarter sleeves, basically. They had to be really long. And your modesty, your shirt, you couldn't show collarbone or anything like that, or like pretty much any skin. That was how women had to dress. Men, it was a little bit different, as is in almost every religion. Women had to be submissive. And so it really honestly was up to, like, the head of the household, what went on in your house. I can only speak for my parents when it comes to the Independent Fundamental Baptist, but I can say that the person behind the pulpit was validating everything that they did to us, if that makes sense. So you may speak to an IFB church and they'll say, oh, that's not my church. It very well could be your church, but just people within your church, if that makes sense. So my parents, within our household, we were beaten. When I was a kid, it started off with belts, and then it went to like riding crops, horse riding crops. And then it went to like anything my dad could get his hand on. Your dad was directly under God, so everything he says you have to do. And my dad was a little wishy-washy sometimes. And so sometimes we would get in trouble for something, and the next time we wouldn't get in trouble for it. So very early on, when I was like 5, 6, 5 and 6, my dad would watch TV. So me and my brother would watch TV if we got permission from my mom. But then if my dad came home and saw us watching TV and he didn't approve of it, we would get beaten. So it was really ridiculous little things like that. I remember a lot of punishments we would get were extreme, but then we would go sit in this was before the boarding schools. We would go sit in the church and the pastor would be preaching, better a pink bottom than a black heart. And it wasn't just like he said it the way I said it. He was screaming it, jumping on pulpits and like saying, basically, if you don't beat your kid's evil. And so as much as people want to say not my church, if you really truly look at the IFB, from John R. Rice to Jack Hyles to Lester Roloff, he's a big one that started the TTI schools. So if you look at them and their teaching, it's hate. It's not discipline. It's straight up hate. Punishments were really off the wall in our household. As we got older, me and my brother would bicker and fight. And so my dad would make us hold hands or sleep together or hug and kiss for hours in front of him. If we spoke out of turn or like back talked, we would get the backhand to our mouth. His favorite one was hot sauce and baking soda, like spoonfuls of baking soda.
Oh, what?
Yeah. As a kid, I did not know that I could have died from that. And so as I got older, to me, I smile at these things because as an adult, I'm like, how would you as an adult think that's like normal? Like you're literally putting something that could kill a child in its mouth. But to them, it was, I guess, necessary. I don't know. My parents, when I was roughly 4, started working. They left the church, like just the church, and started working in boarding schools. And so it's a little different than the church, I guess. It's all a cult, but it's all separate, and it gets different for me than it does for like other people within the IFB.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the schools were run under IFB principles, though, even though they were separate, right?
Well, they are IFB.
Oh,
Agape was its own church, but Circle of Hope and the school down in Florida, they went to churches outside of it. Some of the parishioners that went to the church did not know what was going on at Circle of Hope. And I'm sure if they did, they would have, at the time, they would have been appalled. Some of them, after we went public, did reach out to me saying, I thought something was fishy because of how extreme and torturous these homes get. And I'm not saying that other families within the IFB don't get like that, but it's a different breeding ground because it would be like a pastor keeping its parishioners in the church at all times and being able to do whatever he wants, rather than those families being able to go home and make their own choices. So within the schools, the kids had nowhere to go. And a lot of these men are on power trips and do really sadistic things. And so that's how it gets different.
yeah, I wanted to talk about a little bit because I'm sure there's people who are wondering or thinking to themselves, well, it just sounds like she had bad parents or her parents were sadistic. But what I want to underline here is the fact that it's the environment that breeds these perpetrators. And it's this doctrine that encourages these behaviors, or not even encourages, but demands these behaviors. So can you talk a little bit about, just from the IFB perspective specifically before the boarding schools, what were some of the doctrines that were being promoted for this abuse of children?
So I was 4. So I don't remember that young. I went to like Sunday schools with my parents, and then eventually my dad and mom didn't like us going to Sunday school, so we would have to sit in big church. And then when we weren't quiet enough, we would get beaten for it at home. So I was basically 4 when we left that, and the doctrine wasn't really, it was being brainwashed into me that young, but I don't remember it as much as I remember what I was taught within the schools. And what was taught within the schools is the same doctrine. So at Circle of Hope, a majority of our school credit was learning how to be a wife. It was the book, if I remember correctly, was called How to Be His Helpmeet. And so you were taught how to have sex with your husband, how not to have sex with your husband, how to cook, how to clean, how to make your husband pleased, how to keep your husband pleased, all of these things. It was really when I became a teenager is when I remember it more, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It was all like, oh, this doesn't seem okay. Because as a kid, I was just like, oh, happy Jesus, happy Noah's Ark, blah, 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 all that.
Yeah, so that's really interesting because it seems like purity culture would be so extreme, or at least it seems that way based on the modesty standards. And I noticed from the documentary there's a lot of victim blaming. So if a woman is assaulted or a young girl is assaulted, she's blamed for it. It's her fault. And obviously that's not okay. But they're giving you this book of how to have sex. How young were you when you got this book? Do you remember?
I was 15. That was at Circle of Hope. But I know other schools that my mom like volunteered at gave it to their students younger. So at Circle of Hope, I was 15, but there were younger kids as well. So
interesting. So you actually had, I mean, I don't want to call it sex education, but I guess it's better than nothing to understand how sex works. Did you get any sort of sex education aside from the book, or that was just your main resource?
That was our main resource. And it wasn't really like teaching you properly how to have sex. It was just teaching you, if your husband wants it this way, you give it to him this way.
Oh,
yeah.
oof.
It doesn't matter if you're sick. It doesn't matter if you don't want to. It doesn't matter what you want. It only matters what he wants. And so, but absolutely no sex ed at all.
Knowing that, then it's still, you would be better off not having any sex ed than getting that book, because at that point you're just breeding the perfect paradise for perpetrators, because they can just do whatever they want and you think that that's how it works. So okay, that's not good. All right, so should we get into then the boarding schools specifically? I know you were at Agape. Is there anything that you want to talk about specifically going to that school first?
That's where my parents got more strict. So down in the first school in Florida, it was still IFB, but it was a little more liberal. And that's why my parents left that school. So when we got to Agape, it was a huge culture shock for me. And what I mean by that is out in Florida, I was allowed to wear boy shorts as long as they went below my knee, because I rode horses and it was more comfortable than wearing culottes. And so my dad allowed me to wear boy shorts as long as they went below my knee. And at that point, we were allowed to listen to Christian rock because the school there allowed it. And I was allowed to play Game Boy. I had Game Boys, so I was like allowed to play Mario and things like that. When we got to Agape, my dad took all of that stuff we had and threw it away. And it went from I could only wear skirts and pleated culottes, which I've been trying to find pictures of those to this day. I can't find them. But anytime we wore them, we would joke around saying, oh, we could jump out of a helicopter and be safe because they look like parachutes. We would run around.
So much fabric.
So much fabric. We would run around singing, we represent the parachute kids.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's funny.
That they were horrible. But once we got to Agape, that's basically all I could wear. And then it turned into I could only wear Western clothes, which was that were 2 sizes too big for me. But that's where a lot of the strict rules came in. Now, I was already beaten, like severely beaten for my dad and mom within our home. But when we got to Agape, I noticed almost everyone there was getting, not every staff child, but every student there was getting beaten like I was getting beaten. So I just knew at that point, like I was fucked. There was no way I was getting out of here until I was 18. So I started counting down the days until I was 18. No TV, absolutely no TV. no books unless it was the Bible. I actually had to read through the Bible 3 times a year. And the funniest thing is I can't even remember what John 3:16 is. I know that's like the first verse. But I told Eric Schwarzinski from Preacher Boys, I like messaged him once and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't remember John 3:16. Like, what the hell? I'm proud of myself. Because I thought I would never like ever forget these things. I ran away there and I ended up going to the owner of Agape. His name was Jim Clemenson, and his wife, Kathy Clemenson. And I did tell them what was going on to me. That wasn't the first time. I did it in Florida, but I got beaten worse. But at this school, for some reason, I went to these people thinking they would help me. And they literally called in my parents while acting like they were going to help me. I can't remember everything that was said, but I do remember Jim Clemenson looking at me and telling me if I was beaten, it was because I did something wrong and I deserved it. And then I was made to go home. That wasn't the only time I ran away there. I ran away multiple times, but I never actually got anywhere because I was 10 when we got there. I was 14 when we left. That school is also where my dad started learning certain punishments for students. Before, like in the first place in Florida, it was different. Like I said, they would get spanked and they would have to write sentences. And I have talked to girls that were spanked and abused by my dad there. So it did happen, but it was not every student. It was very hush hush, if that makes sense, the first school. So at Agape, they did push-ups, jumping jacks, basically military boot camp. And that was one of the forms of punishments that they would use regularly. And, you know, doing push-ups and all that stuff that's not what we have an issue with. It's the excessive amount of push-ups you had to do. It would be thousands sometimes. I'm not even kidding you. Like, kids would be pushing and their arms would be like rubber. They couldn't push anymore. Kids would be throwing up, not being able to continue. But they had no choice. They had to continue. And then my dad learned at the school the 5-point restraint, which is where at Agape, they would take them up to the room. But when Circle of Hope was officially opened, I finally found out what a 5-point restraint was. So it's where they slam a kid to the ground. A staff member puts his knee on the back of the kid's neck with a pressure point, or where the pressure point is. One staff gets on an arm, one staff gets on the leg. So there's 5 staff total on a kid, and they're pushing all their weight on their pressure points. And so my dad learned all of that stuff at Agape.
How long would they do that for?
I don't know at Agape because I was not in the room. I do know like friends who went through that, and they can't tell you how long. It was hours. On record, though, why would they log these things? Agape logged restraining a kid for 45 minutes. Jeez. But then they would tell their parents, like, no, we didn't do that. We didn't do that. No longer than 5 minutes. But then they are logging what they actually did. I'm glad they did that. I really am. But it was weird to me. But it wasn't just the 5-point restraint going up in that room. I found out from my friends later that they were getting punched, beaten, and thrown around. But I wasn't in the room for that. I just know that they would come out bloody. And so it makes sense. It happened so long that they just, you don't really know how long sometimes. At Circle of Hope, it would go on for hours.
What were some of the things that would cause these punishments? Like, how small of an infraction could you commit to have to get punished like this?
Not smiling, not speaking up loud enough, which is funny because as a woman, you're supposed to be all meek and humble and quiet.
And is this all rooted in biblical teachings?
The biblical teachings are the man is the head of the household, so whatever he says goes.
So that's how they justify it?
That's how they justify it.
Oh, did they also talk to you about the spare the rod, spoil the child verse?
I don't know if you know who Debbie Pearl and Debbie and Mike
Yes.
Pearl are.
We've done a whole episode on To Train Up a Child.
That's the book we were raised on. And in there, it's said millions of times, I'm sure. So yeah, that was the justification. But it could literally be for anything that the man of the household didn't agree with. Yeah, it's always hard to explain because if I didn't like eating something, that would be what I had to eat for the whole week. because I wasn't thankful for what God gave me. Or if I wasn't smiling enough, I had the devil in my heart. And so you just learn to fake smile, which is weird because I always felt fake smiling. So.
Yeah, you're forcing these emotions that aren't there while also trying to deconstruct all these things that are happening to you in real time. I can imagine that would be extremely difficult to put on a smile while you are deeply, deeply hurting inside, or just not even acknowledging the hurt because you have to be numb to it in order to be in that survival mode.
Yeah. That's why anytime someone tells me to smile now, I kind of laugh because I'm like, oh.
I mean, I feel like no one should do that anyway, right?
I know.
When guys are like, just smile more. I'm like, how about I punch you in your face?
Exactly.
So speaking of the guys, because if they're using the justification of the patriarchy to control women, did you find in your experience that the little boys were punished as well, or was it mostly the little girls?
No, the little boys were punished as well. But like I said, every household is different. At Agape, there were certain women as well that were special. And so they didn't get the same kind of punishments at all. So this is also where it gets different from the IFB, people going home and staying in a community, is because I got to see how different everyone lived and how everyone took the Bible and had their own convictions, and it never felt fair. The owner's granddaughters would be allowed to go off property and wear pants and things like that. But if I did that, I would not only be in trouble with my parents, I would be in trouble with the owners. I got to see how when other people went home, how different they actually acted. Whereas a lot of other people had different isolations where like their household, that's all they knew. In my household, all I knew was abuse, but I did see other people not having the same kind of punishments. And so I kind of felt like an outcast. I know people when I was growing up didn't believe me or didn't want to believe me or admit to it. But as soon as our documentary came out, so many people were like, I knew that happened. I knew you were being abused. And I'm like, and you didn't say, like, adults, like, you didn't say anything. Like, you could have done something. Oh, but it's religion and convictions and all this stuff. And I'm like, no, you just used that as a cop out. Like, you knew what was wrong. And if you feel, oh, not my Bible, then why didn't you do anything? Like, it wasn't just my parents being able to hide it behind their own closed doors. They were getting away with it in a community of people who not everyone had the same beliefs.
Yeah. I did remember from the documentary you saying that your grandmother called CPS. Do you want to talk about that experience at all?
Yes. I think I was 4 or 5. It was it was before my parents started working at the school in Florida. So I was like 3. I have always been a very picky eater, but I guess I didn't eat my meal one night. And my grandma watched my dad, I was 3, pull me from a chair, take me into back room somewhere. She doesn't know what happened, but I can tell you I was beaten to the point that I couldn't sit down. That's all she said when I came out, I couldn't sit down, and I kept crying saying, I don't want to sit down. It hurts. It hurts. It hurts. And my dad's like, I don't know what he said, but he didn't care. And so he picks me up and he slams me on the chair and force feeds me my food. And so my grandma called CPS, and I was already so brainwashed, even though like the doctrine didn't quite hit me, if that makes sense. I was already so brainwashed when the police came out. They asked me to lift my skirt to show them the bruises. And I said, no, I didn't listen to my dad. I deserved this. And they left.
Why didn't they do better? It's a 3-year-old. Why are you going to take a 3-year-old's word for it? It just, so many balls were dropped in that scenario, and it's really upsetting to hear that.
From my own personal experiences, CPS and the police don't do their job. Within Agape and the Circle of Hope situation, multiple times it was reported, but multiple times they kept saying, oh, the police have to take care of it. Oh, CPS has to take care of it. And that was the answer every time I contacted them. And then finally, I got a hold of one lady who was the first CPS lady to show up at Circle of Hope. And she's like, my hands are tied. She's like, I can't do anything if the sheriff department doesn't do anything. And so I found out there that everyone just wants to place the blame on everyone else.
Yeah.
And so I truly feel the system needs to be redone. Like it doesn't do what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, clearly they're not protecting the kids.
Or they take out kids that aren't needing to be taken out. Like there's no abuse there, and they remove them. And it's like, there's actual kids that need help. Like, this family is a loving family, and you just don't like that their house isn't clean. There's literally kids out here getting beaten, and you don't do anything.
Yeah.
So I feel like it just needs to be scrubbed and redone.
So was there anything else you wanted to talk about with Agape before we move to the next boarding school?
No, just the fact that Agape is where my dad learned how to do what Circle of Hope becomes.
Okay. And is Agape still running?
Agape was shut down in 2021, January 2021. The name Agape was shut down. We got a law passed in Missouri. It was supposed to be a really strong bill, but they removed a lot of things. And so within the bill, we found out that group homes were allowed to remain. And so as long as there's less than 10 kids, I think it is, I have to get the wording specifically, but as long as there's a certain amount of kids, they don't have to register and make the state know that they exist. We have spies, if that makes sense. We found out that the staff families stayed on the property of Agape and are now running individual group homes. And so Agape name is shut down, but the premise of Agape is still being used for the same exact thing, but it's now called Stone of Help or Stone of Hope, one of those two.
Okay, so this could, well, very likely is still going on, the abuse of children.
Oh, I would bet on it, yeah. Especially because Brian Clemenson is still there. Like, he is still physically on that property.
Well, that makes me sick, and we need to figure out what we need to do to report them or to get people to go in and investigate. That's
been the hard part. That has been almost impossible to do because Agape's been at this for 30 years. They were in Washington, they moved to they were in California, moved to Washington, and then Missouri. And so they know what they're doing to get away from it. Messed up part is the town itself is corrupt. The son-in-law of Agape and a staff member of Agape were both on the pay list of the sheriff's department as deputies.
Oh, great.
Yeah. And then the prosecuting attorney as well has donated money to fund a scholarship for students to go to Agape. The judge has showed us, I can't find paper trails or anything, but the judge has showed us that he doesn't give a shit about the victims. And all of that area is just corrupt. And that's been the hard part, is like figuring out how we're going to get a whole town held accountable, because it's not just, it's
bigger.
Yeah, bigger, but they're able to get away with it because it's such a small town community and good old boy network.
So you just mentioned giving scholarships to go to the school. So parents are paying for their children to go to this abusive environment?
Yes. Agape was expensive. I don't know. I think it turned out to be $3,500 a month or something like that. Circle of Hope, when I was there, I can't speak on after, but when I was there, my dad did this whole, like, God's going to make this work. It's meant to happen. We have faith. If a parent can't pay however much they allotted, I think it was like $1,500, then they'll look at their bank statements and take what God tells them to take. And I know one parent was paying $75 a month, but that parent actually did not pay for the majority of the time her daughter was there. My parents would bitch about it, like all the time, bitch how this parent wouldn't pay, but then put on this whole thing of, God's taking care of us. This parent hasn't been paying, and that's okay. We can handle it because God, but then would bitch about it. So, they also, on top of taking parents' money, would take donations from churches or anyone else that wanted to donate. So it was a scam from like a whole bunch of different angles.
Yeah. What? I'm struggling to see why parents would want to send their kids to this. Are they on board with the abuse? Do they know the abuse is happening? Do they think they're getting a higher education? What's the draw here for a parent?
Two different draws. The draw is Christian. When you think of a Christian, when you think of Jesus, when you think of God, as a secular parent, you don't want to think of evil. You don't want to think of bad. And so a lot of people think if they see the word Christian, then that must be good. And so a lot of parents truly sent their daughter to a place that they thought would actually care and take care of their daughter because of the word Christian. Other parents were IFB and sent their kids to these places because they were IFB. I'm sure you had spoken to Kathy.
Mm-hmm.
She was sent away to one of these places as well and can go into it, but she was also raised IFB. So that's a lot of how kids get sent away, is one, word of mouth, or because, oh, Christian, okay, you're safe here. When you can't just take a name as a name, you have to truly look. Like, you have to look into these places.
So it's safe to say that a lot of parents just simply had no idea the abusive environment they were placing their children. They had good intentions, and that's just not what they got.
For Circle of Hope, yes. I will say that. Some other parents I can't speak on, but Circle of Hope, I know specifically, I've talked to multiple parents who sat on the phone crying because they wanted to help their children, and it was the opposite.
So do you want to talk about then Circle of Hope specifically? So your parents opened this school, and I'm wondering if you have any perspective or speculation on their intentions. Do you think they really just had a sadistic tendency and wanted to just harm children? Do you think they thought they were doing things for God or in God's name?
I struggle with that question because everything in me wants to believe that they wanted to help kids, and that's what they would say. But being an adult now, no, I truly believe, after talking to, I knew my story, and I knew I knew what I witnessed with the girls at Circle of Hope. I didn't know everything. But after talking to multiple people, and not just people that I was there with, people after, I think my dad opened an all-girls school for his own sadistic pleasure. I don't think it was just because he wanted to help people, because at first it was going to be a boys' school. And then he decided not to and open a girls' school. And then actually my whole childhood, my dad was inappropriate to a lot of young girls. But as a kid, it didn't strike me as sexual. It struck me as, I want that attention from my dad. Like, why is my dad treating you better than me? Like, why don't you get in trouble from my dad? Like, it was more of a jealous thing. There was one girl who he would always have in his office with the door cracked open this much, or she was massaging his head and neck. And it was just, you don't do that. And so as I got older and started hearing things from girls that I was like, no, that didn't happen. You're lying. I started like realizing everything. And then I was just like, no, he definitely opened this because he's a sick person. I wanted to believe he opened it for the goodness of the world, but no.
Yeah. Were you actually learning? Did you get a decent education from these schools?
No, I did not. We got, I don't know if you know what accelerated Christian education is. That was the schooling we did. It's little pamphlets, like PACEs. Apparently, it's completely different from when I was in school, but they had little comics. All the characters were segregated. Whites were with whites, blacks were with blacks, Asians were with Asians, Hispanics, et cetera, et cetera. And so you were taught racism subtly that way. You weren't really taught science. I learned that if you licked a bag of chips on the inside, you could die because of pesticides they put in there. That was one of our science things. To be honest, I honestly, after I got out of the whole cult, I was like 17, I disassociated and blocked a lot of it out. So a lot of the stuff I'm just now like remembering, and like after watching Let Us Pray and like listening to other people, Rachel and Ruthie and all of them like say things, I'm like, Oh yeah, I forgot about that. And
Mm-hmm.
so like a lot of it is still coming back to me, but our education was it was the equivalent of a GED.
Okay. And what are the ages of these girls going to this school, Circle of Hope?
5 was the youngest. I want to say the oldest left at 24. I don't remember. I know 21. My friend Maggie left at 21, but they would keep them as until they were adults. Oh wait, no, I lied. I do know the oldest was 30. She was adopted out of the Philippines and she is mentally handicapped. I'm not sure. I don't know the exact diagnosis, but my parents had her legally diagnosed by the state of Missouri as incompetent to live on her own. That was the wording that it said on the thing, but I don't remember. I don't remember why they told me like when it happened, but I don't remember what the actual diagnosis was, other than what the state of Missouri's website said. She was there until 2020, until Circle of Hope shut down. Well, before Circle of Hope shut down, we were speaking out about when I found out she was there. That was wrong. Like, why are you having a 30-year-old who should, yeah. So we took to TikTok and we created a hashtag, Where's Rachel Kellso? And her parents pulled her. Her parents pulled her from Circle of Hope. But
Good.
she was there until she was 30.
Oh, wow. Do you think she was receiving the same treatment slash abuse that everyone else was?
She got it worse than anyone when I was there.
What?
Like when I was there, like I witnessed it. She was the one that got it every day. And my dad like kept his eye on her a lot. Restraint all the time. But the thing is, she had such a good heart after her punishment. She would just look at all of us and smile to make sure like everyone else was okay, because we had to witness it, like all of it. We had to witness it. I found out that she was still there in I think 2020, and I found out that she was still getting the same exact punishments. And that's when I was pissed. Like not
Yeah.
only at my parents, I was pissed at her parents. But her parents are IFB and the type that are like, oh, just lock her away forever. And so she was there
Mm.
for like 15 years.
Oh my gosh. And some of these punishments, you've mentioned the restraint. When you guys were talking about them on the documentary, they were quite awful. Are you comfortable speaking about any of those so people have an idea of what's going on in these schools?
So at Circle of Hope, my dad, like I said earlier, my dad learned the 5-point restraint from Agape. I can speak to you on what I witnessed at Circle of Hope and how they were enforced. Rachel had a hard time controlling her emotions. And if she cried, which would often happen regularly because she was missing home, I'm speaking on her because this is an instant I remember specifically. She would get picked up by the back of her neck from my dad and slammed on the ground, and my dad would yell restrain. When he yelled restrain, we all had to come, all of us, older girls that were higher up shirts had to come and put all of our weight on their pressure points. At Agape, one girl to the wrist and one girl to each leg. 2 girls to each leg, 2 girls to each arm. So 5 people total. That would happen. Rachel got it for hours, like hours. We would be told if we didn't do it hard enough that we would be next. So we would be sitting there for hours pushing as hard as we can. And my mom and dad would need a break. And so my mom and dad would switch with each other. So my mom would take place where my dad was, and they would kiss and smile at each other. And it was
Mm,
almost like they enjoyed it. It
yeah.
was that happened almost every day. A restraint happened almost every day. There was a shirt system. Lower shirts when I was there was, I think, black, then orange, pink, green, purple, and red. And so purple and red were the highest you could be. Black was the lowest you could be, which was sin. If you were a black shirt, you typically stood on the wall and you were either given triple portions or half portions, meaning you didn't get the same amount of food everyone else did. You either got more or way less. And that was a punishment for being just a black shirt. Orange shirt, usually that was because you were a new girl. And yellow shirts were like you've been there for a few weeks and you knew the rules. And then pink shirts, you don't need anyone to teach you the rules. You should know the rules. And so usually it was the purple and red shirts that would have to come over and facilitate the restraints. We also had to dish out punishments like workouts, like jumping jacks, push-ups, and things like that for anything we saw wrong. And here's the thing, because it's such a dog eat dog world, everyone there is looking for someone to mess up just so they can get some sort of privilege that you're kind of anticipating. It's not necessarily like you will get it, but a lot of the times if you bring up something to Boyd or Stephanie and they see fit to punish, you could get a reward. Like you could get extra coffee, you could get like extra minutes in the showers. So it was always, you had to give punishments. If you didn't give a punishment to someone because they talked, someone else would go snitch and say this, happened, and then you would get in trouble. It was dominated by fear. That's why we did it. We were scared. Like we literally were scared that same punishment would happen to us. So if people are wondering like, I wouldn't, or saying like, I wouldn't do that. Well, you probably would, because the way it's set up, you lose everything if you don't do what they teach you. And so you just learn to have and do everything everything they say. Be happy, give push-ups, handle all of that. Like you learn to do that. And it pits the girls against each other. And honestly, I'm surprised that the majority of us are still friends to this day because of the shit we had to do to each other, but we still talk to this day. So
yeah, they're turning victims into perpetrators as another means of control. It's awful that they would make you do things like that. And I mean, I'm just like at a loss for words. I can't even imagine how that was for you, trying to be the best you can be, but also being forced to snitch on other people, being forced to abuse other people. That's a lot to deconstruct, all while you're just in this survival mode, as we talked about earlier. You're just trying to make it through. So were there any other punishments that you wanted to speak on?
None that I can think off the top of my head that I haven't already spoken about. Water, like excessively drinking water was a punishment, which I also found out years later as an adult that you can die from that as well. They did a lot of things that were very, very scary that as a kid, you don't realize that. And honestly, I don't like, it's not that I don't like talking about it. It's just some of the stuff I don't like traumatizing other people with.
Yeah.
And so if you wanted to, you could read the court documents on a lot of it. It's pretty bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. So you knew that you needed to escape at a very young age and you were counting down the days. So at what point were you successful, or how many attempts did it take for you to be successful?
My parents opened up in June of 2006, and in August of 2006, I ran away with 2 of their students. We made it all the way to New Mexico. Me never being outside of that world, I was scared. And so I contacted my grandma and I got sent back. But it wasn't until 2008 my parents kicked me out because they were in that religion. If you wear pants, or not in that, my parents' convictions and a lot of other IFB convictions, if you wore pants, you were going to hell. And so my dad did our devotions, and the 5-year-old girl that was there was crying. And so I asked her, I was like, "What? Are you okay?" Because we shared a room, and she's like, "No." She's like, I don't want my mom to go to hell. And so I looked at her and I said, "If your mom's going to hell for wearing pants, honey," I was like, "my dad's mom's in hell, my sister's in hell, and my dad's sister is in hell." And one of the girls went and told my parents I said that. And so it took a month, but I was eventually kicked out of the cult. And that was the best thing that ever happened to me, to be honest with you. So
yeah. So
that's how I escaped.
You said you were 17 when that happened?
I was 17.
How did you go about the world? How did you survive at that age?
I stayed with my grandma for a little bit, but then my grandpa, who honestly I love my grandma, but I was closer to my grandpa. He died, and that fucked with me. And so I was homeless a lot. But eventually I did get a good, decent job in apartment management and have been pretty well since then. So
I feel like we skipped a big chunk, though. I mean, so yes, I do want to talk about how you're doing now, but what was that deconstruction process like for you?
I did a lot of heavy drugs. I did a lot of things that I'm not proud of to this day. I didn't really start deconstructing until 2012, and I was kicked out in like 2008, 2009.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of it literally was just me not talking to my family, avoiding family, and just disassociating from reality.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really wasn't until I had my kids that I started deconstructing. I don't even remember what got my wanting to look into cults, but my whole childhood I was told that IFB is not a cult, that Mormonism was a cult, Catholicism was a cult. I think I started watching something about the Unabomber, and then it went to like some theories of it being some other guy that ended up getting kind of like how Waco went down. And then after watching that story of Waco popped up on my thing, and I was like, oh, Mormonism's a cult. I want to watch, like, I want to watch this. I want to see. And so I'm watching it, and I'm like sitting there, I'm like, that's literally the same way I was raised, except the difference is openly men did not have more than one lover. Openly. I say that because a lot of them were doing sketchy things behind the scene with multiple kids, not just women, kids. That really opened my eyes. And then I went down the rabbit hole of Mormons who left the faith. And a lot of what they said hit me. A lot of it resonated. And I just went like from there, just watching not just Mormonism cults, but like Child of God cults, all the cults. And I was like, okay, well, maybe IFB isn't as suicidal as some of them, but they all are very, very identical in the way they teach with fear. You can't do anything except think exactly the same way the person leading the cult thinks.
Yep.
Otherwise, you're evil. It really hit me then that I was raised in a cult. It still took me 2 to 3 years from there to be like, okay, this is still going on, and I need to do something about it. And as much as it's going to suck because it's my family, I can't just sit back and know that it's still happening. And so it didn't happen as fast for me. It was really 2015 that it all like was like, no, I have to do something. So I'm still not in I'm an atheist. I don't believe in any heaven or hell, but I still have I just got out of a 10-year relationship where I was not okay with being the slave, but it took me really long to realize that the way I was taught it's not how it should be. And so I left one crappy situation and got into another crappy situation, which is very normal, very normal.
Yeah.
And so I'm still in the very new baby phases of my healing journey and coming to terms with everything. So it's not a very like wonderful deconstructing story. I'm sorry.
No, it doesn't need to be. I think, and thank you for being candid and honest, because really, I think it's better for people to hear these types of stories so that they don't glamorize or expect a deconstruction that is roses and butterflies, because it's really not. Deconstruction is extremely difficult. You're figuring out your identity, you're building up a new community, or you're trying to find your footing, all while trying to keep yourself alive. And it's really, really difficult. And so I think it's important that people understand that the overcorrections can happen, getting into drugs or too much alcohol, or pick anything that you want that can be damaging if you go too far. I think people need to understand that that's a very real possibility, and it does happen quite often. And so I appreciate you being vulnerable and honest about that, because it is something that needs to be talked about, especially the relationship thing. So correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like you're referring to, you jumped into a relationship that had similar patterns with the patriarchal structure, being submissive, and it took you a while to realize even that wasn't for you, right?
Yes. So I got out in 2008, 2009, was like on my own for a little bit. And then ended up pregnant, thinking how I was raised, you have to have the dad, like two people. And so actually wasn't really in the relationship for 10 years, just lived on his property for that long. So for about, I'd say 6-7 years we were together. It felt like I was literally back in Circle of Hope. Not sadistically, I can't say it like that, but everything had to be a certain way. And if I'm going through custody, so I don't really know how much I want to get into this, but let's just say when we would get into arguments, I would tell him that he reminded me of my dad because everything had to be his way, but he would never put in the effort to help me keep it that way. And so I literally was just a slave and a babysitter. They were my kids, so I don't mean that in a way like that. I just mean it like he never helped with the kids either, like nothing like that. So I did get into a toxic relationship, and why I stayed was because I kept telling myself, am I feeling this way because I was taught that I had to be this way and I want to rebel against how I was taught? Like, am I wrong? Like, is it really how I feel?
Yeah.
And I would ask my therapist, but I don't think she understood the question either. But like, honestly, I felt like I wasn't happy because I was raised that I should be this way. And I was in the process of deconstructing, but feeling like maybe my deconstruction was me saying no, and I should be okay with it.
Yeah.
When in reality, no, I was not in a good situation. Like I had many red flags around me, but because I was raised a certain way and didn't want to face it that it was wrong, it took me a long time. And even after we officially broke up, I still stayed. A lot of it was because I didn't have anyone. I don't have family to fall back on. And so I stayed on his property in an RV. It wasn't until 2022, beginning of 2023, my son came to me and I found out he was talking shit about me to my kids. And I have never once talked shit about him to my kids, even though I could have vented to my kids so many times, but you don't do that. You don't fucking do that. I decided, I was like, no, one, I'm miserable. I knew how my mom was, and I felt like my mom always put out the appearance of miserableness. And I never wanted my kids to see me like that. And so I made a decision it was the hardest decision of my life, but the best decision of my life. And I just left because I didn't want my kids to think that that's love, because it's not. I want my kids to truly experience what I never got to experience. And it really, truly took me seeing that my kids were experiencing exactly what I was experiencing, minus the abuse, just like the mental like stress of what I could feel. My mom and dad didn't love each other. I had to do something, and so I left. It's hard when you leave a environment that's all you know is control, or people telling you what to do, and move into another environment like that because you're used to it. Like it just makes sense. And so that's, I know a lot of people go through it, but even though I knew a lot of people did that, I was like, no, not me. So it was really hard, but I had to trust my instincts, even though it took me years.
Yeah, but it's something that needs to be talked about. The whole, you fall back into what you know. And I hate to use the word because it's comfortable, because of course you don't want that. You don't want that environment, but it's familiar. Maybe that's a better word.
It's familiar. That's probably, yeah.
Yeah. And so you just kind of slip into it, maybe unknowingly, or maybe it starts off as a good situation until it isn't, and you're back in that same place, but you don't really know how to get out of it. Or in your situation, you weren't quite sure what normal was, because maybe you didn't have any of that healthy modeling of a healthy relationship. And so you're wondering, is it me? Am I the problem? Do I just need to fall in line? Is this normal? A lot of questioning yourself, knowing that you didn't like it, but not knowing if there's something better out there, and you have kids to take care of. I just find it extremely admirable that you were able to see your children in a different way, even though you had slipped back into some of those same patterns as far as your environment, not you, the way you're treating your children, but slipping into that environment and recognizing, I don't want this for my kids. I want something different. It takes a very strong person to get themselves out of that situation and not continue and perpetuate the cycle. So amazing job that you were able to do that for your kids. And I'm sure that they are extremely grateful. One last thing as well with the topic of your parents, are you able to talk about where they're at now?
Yes, my parents are in house arrest. Some messed up things happened and they no longer have ankle bracelets to monitor them. They're allowed to go to church and Walmart. They were supposed to go to trial November 2023. And like I had mentioned earlier, that town is so corrupt. Things have been allowed that shouldn't be allowed. Like I said, they don't have ankle bracelets anymore. Their trial date's been pushed back. The trial date being pushed back is a good thing because they're trying to make it to where the prosecuting attorney cannot seek lesser charges than what the attorney general is seeking. Because the prosecuting attorney has tried that. So it's good that that happened, but it's not good that they're going to be out on house arrest without ankle monitors and being able to go to church where they learned a lot of this abuse, where they were able to perpetrate a lot of this abuse. They shouldn't be allowed. The next trial is set. We don't have an exact date. We just have a time frame of sometime after September 30th of this year. I have absolutely no idea what's going to go on. I keep feeling like the prosecuting attorney is trying everything he can to keep pushing it back to maybe people will forget about it and nothing will be done. But I won't forget about it, and the girls won't forget about it, and the boys from Agape won't forget about it. So they have a really hard time on their hands if they think that they're going to be able to continue doing things like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the updates for right now. It's not the best, but it's what we have.
Who was it that actually pressed charges against them and got the school shut down?
The state did.
Okay, so someone was finally tipped off enough to do something about it.
Oh, TikTok. Yeah, so we went to TikTok and constantly TikTokers kept contacting.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, in 2020, we went to TikTok and brought everything, and they kept I can't even tell you how many, but to the point the prosecuting attorney in Stockton answered the phone to one of our followers that were helping and yelled, "I don't know what's going on with the case. I'm so overwhelmed with all these phone calls. Leave us alone," and slammed the phone down. And so I know he got so many that it made him do something, which cracks me up because I'm like, oh, you guys.
That's amazing. Yeah. The power of social media. Wow. Yeah. I mean, honestly, affecting change like that and getting your parents punishment, or hopefully a greater punishment than just a not really ankle bracelet. So, I mean, that's a step in the right direction.
It honestly made us feel heard for the first time when we went to TikTok. TikTok is the best for activism, in my own opinion, because a lot of people care there. But no, we felt heard for the very first time when we went to TikTok.
Yeah. And what has it been like for you since the documentary came out? Let us pray.
I've been MIA because 2020, 2021, and 2022 were nonstop Dateline, news articles, like everything. So since Let Us Pray came out, I have been taking me time and relaxing and doing things more so behind the scenes. My current boyfriend and I right now are working on, we actually connected through activism, and he had an idea for a law called Gabby's Law, and it's to teach bodily autonomy to kids in school.
Yes.
And so we connected there, and that's what we are going to be focusing on and
that's
doing
amazing.
More of, because as much as I love doing social media, it's a lot. So, and yeah, the goal of mine. So ours.
That is so great. It's so important for kids to learn that, even if it's not sex education related, it's just boundaries related. And this is your body, and only you can decide who touches it. And this is what boundaries mean. That's just, oh, that's so great. I'm so happy that you're doing that.
Thank you. Yeah, when he gave me the idea, I was like, if we don't work out, I'm going to be really sad because we have the same goals, and I'm glad we worked out. So
yeah, that's amazing. So I know that we had talked about the documentary. This is off camera. The documentary missed some things or left some things out due to editing, which we understand it happens all the time with these documentaries. But is there anything that we haven't talked about that you wished you could have seen in the documentary?
a lot that was left out isn't my story. It's the other Circle of Hope stories. And
Okay.
so would you be willing, if I can ask other survivors from Circle of Hope, would you be willing to speak to them as well? They were not in the documentary.
Absolutely.
It's not just my story, and I don't like sharing their stories without them. I think it needs to come from them. So
Absolutely. Yes, please put us in touch because we want to amplify voices, platform people. It usually ends up happening that we bring on documentary guests because we can connect with them. It's a little bit easier when you know someone who's already spoken out. Otherwise, we're just kind of like reaching in the dark, like who wants to talk to us? So that's usually where we start, but we love referrals, absolutely, so that we can continue to spread the awareness, platform this message, get these stories out, and ultimately have them be heard.
Definitely. Thank you. That would mean so much to me. I honestly do a lot of the interviews and stuff that people ask only because I feel like maybe if I do it, they'll like reach out to some of the other Circle of Hope girls. But a lot of the times it just ends with me, and it's not me ending it. It's just the other podcasters or whatever don't.
Yeah.
And it makes me sad because their story needs to be heard. I'm only telling you what I saw and what I went through. What they went through is a different experience because it's what they went through and what they were feeling. It wasn't their parents. It was my parents. It's all I knew. And I think it would be more shocking hearing it from people who had no idea what they were in for.
Right. Yeah, I'd be happy to. So we'll definitely connect more after this. But before we go, I want to know more about how you're doing. If there's anything that brings you peace that you want to share, your consciousness side of the story.
What brings me peace right now is being a mom. I get jaded that I didn't get a childhood that I should have gotten. I lived through my kids. I do things with them that I wouldn't normally have. And so as a kid, I wouldn't have had. And so that's usually what like brings me peace, is being a mom.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful. Well, they're very lucky to have you as their mother. I can tell you're putting a lot of effort into giving them an amazing childhood and something that they won't have to deconstruct from when they're adults. So that's amazing. Ending the cycle.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. Who knows?
I mean, I hear that there's always I hear there's always things that can mess up kids, right? And it's like even if you're doing your best, you know, there's always going to be something, but we're making an effort. That's all that we can really do. Yes. We're doing our best. So that's important. So with that, I need your Linda listen moment, your sassy statement as the viral video with the toddler goes, or something inspirational. It's up to you.
I actually meant to tell you that part had me overwhelmed because I'm not a sassy person.
You don't have to be sassy if you don't want to.
So I don't have to do the sassy. I can do the other one.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Okay. What was the other inspirational quote?
So it could be something like, Linda, listen, your body is yours and no one has a right to it except for you. That's an example.
Can I do that? Can I steal your
Sure.
thing you just said? Okay, because that's
sure.
perfect.
I mean, I kind of stole it from your words, so that's fine. We can do that. Okay, perfect. Well, this has been so great. Thank you so much for coming on and being so open and vulnerable and sharing. It really means a lot that you're willing to do that.
And thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Is there any final thoughts that you have before we go?
I just want to say to everyone out there that has ever done a YouTube video on leaving their faith, I have probably watched it, and I am thankful for you doing that because I felt alone. I knew something was always wrong, but I always being told that I wasn't wrong. It was weird. So like finding YouTube and people talking about they're just deconstructing their faith, like seriously, it helps people. It really does. So thank you.
Yeah. And the same goes for you. It's a beautiful thing, survivors coming out and sharing their stories, and it does make a huge impact. So we thank you. We thank everyone else who has ever come on this channel as well. We thank the viewers for watching and supporting. It means so, 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 so much. Leaving those comments, words of encouragement are a beautiful way for the guests to feel heard and validated and seen. And if you want to contact Amanda here, you can go to TikTok, Not My Father's Daughter, over there. And we'll link everything in the description below that she wants us to link. And if you want to support the podcast even further, you can get some of our merch. We have I'm Sorry for What I Said When I Was in a Cult t-shirts, Apostates Unite, a lot of other different things, Linda Listen. And you can find that at cultstoconsciousness.com under the merch tab. You can become a patron at patreon.com/cultstoconsciousness. Our newest patrons, Ruthann, Emily, and Bonnie, thank you so much for joining us. And if you want to go to Costa Rica and just hang out with us and do something fun and not culty, you can do that. It's at the end of August. And the link is in the description if you want to do that. There's 6 spots left, so we're really close to filling it up. I think that's everything. And so if you like this video, I'll link 2 more down here below. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.